What's good, YouTube? This is Boxingwave. Please subscribe to the channel. Later this evening, we have a pretty big top rank card. It's going to be on ESPN. Shakur Stevenson and Edwin De Los Santos is going to be facing off, fighting for the vacant WBC World Lightweight title. Okay. Also, co-main event, Emmanuel Navarrete is going to be defending his WBO junior lightweight title against Robson Conceicao. All right. And this is a full card of just prospects. I mean, all of the big gun prospects that is signed to Top Rank is going to be on this undercard, okay? We got Brian Norman Jr., we got Floyd Diaz, Troy Isley, you got Abdullah Mason, Emiliano Vargas. You got a lot of fighters on this undercard. There's a lot of preliminary fights on this card. And I went to check on ESPN, and basically the preliminary fights is scheduled to start at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Now, I do want to cover some of these fights and some of these fighters because I do like a lot of these up-and-coming prospects, but that's just a little too early. And the Shakur Stevenson walkout is not even going to be until 11:30, 12 p.m. Eastern. So I am going to come on early, but it's just going to be too soon, and I don't want to be on YouTube for 8 hours tonight. You know, that's just going to be a little too long. So I will come on early, but I'm not sure what time yet. But I will try to get on early because there's a couple of these preliminary fights that I do absolutely want to catch, all right? Especially Brian Norman Jr. against Quentin Randall, and also Troy Isley against Vladimir Hernandez. Those are the two fights that I see being very, very competitive. The rest of them is pretty much a showcase fight for most of the prospects on the come up, okay? But you have a lot of young talent on this card, and I love it because Top Rank is keeping these guys active. I gotta admit, I have to say Top Rank right now is my favorite. I know Showtime had a hell of a year because they were pretty much on the way out, you know. But as far as like young prospects getting, you know, staying active and being on card after card, I have to say that they're doing a great job for the younger guys that's on the come up. I think they're doing the best. And, you know, that's even in comparison to Matchroom and everybody else that's out there. I just love the activity of these top ranked young fighters. Bob has been doing a good job throwing all of these young fighters on a card. You know, every couple weeks or so, these guys are always in another fight. All right. So anyway, there's 4 fights that I really mainly want to speak on in this video, including you know, the main events. Again, you have a lot of young talent, but breakdowns you're not going to get from me here when it comes to Abdullah Mason and Emiliano Vargas and stuff like that, because I'm expecting those guys to just show out, and I just don't have time to, you know, do film study of their opponents, all right? Especially at this stage of their careers, you know what I mean? It's just look out for these guys. Floyd Diaz, very talented, seen him fight. Troy Isley, you know, all of these guys. Abdullah Mason, a lot of people are looking at him, watching him. These guys are very talented, but I can't be doing breakdowns for their fights at this point. You know what I mean? Not at this stage. But when they're ready to step up, which I believe Troy Isley is stepping up to fight Vladimir Hernandez. This is a step-up fight for him. This is against a real, you know, contender, a real fighter at 160. And also Brian Norman Jr. is stepping up big time fighting Quentin Randall. Okay, that's a real 50-50 fight in my opinion. All right, so those are real fights, and those are the fights that I really want to cover later on tonight. Troy Isley fight, Brian Norman fight, and of course the 2 main event and the co-main events. All right, but I will be here tonight. I don't want to give you an exact time because I want to monitor what fights are actually going on before I just jump on, okay? But I do want to cover those fights specifically. So if one of those fights start, I'm gonna keep my eye out and I'm gonna jump on. I just don't want to be on for like 8 hours and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Anyway, let's start out with Troy Isley against Vladimir Hernandez. All right, Troy Isley, a guy on the come up, middleweight, very good fighter, pretty explosive, good boxing technique. Is a good balanced fighter, not the biggest puncher, but I like him because he has a little bit of dog in him. You know what I mean? He can mix it up. He can control distance decently. He brings pretty much everything in his game. You know what I mean? And I'm surprised that they're with 10 fights in, they're matching him up with Vladimir Hernandez this soon. I know Lorenzo Truck Simpson recently fought Hernandez to a majority decision, very close fight, competitive fight. That video is on YouTube. And also, Vladimir Hernandez was the guy that upset Julian J. Rock Williams on his comeback after losing to Banana. We know J. Rock beat Jared Hurd, and then he fought Banana, and then he lost that fight. And then I think he was out for a little bit, came back for Hernandez and lost that fight too before moving up to middleweight. So Julian J. Rock Williams lost to Vladimir Hernandez. Now, Vladimir went on to lose to Jesus Ramos. All right, and he got stopped in 6 rounds. But, the matchup favored Ramos in that fight because he's a bigger guy and he's a guy that's willing to trade. And, Vladimir Hernandez is a guy that is a pressure fighter, volume puncher type of guy, likes to come straight at you. So I like the fight because I think that it's a great test for Isley, but if Isley isn't careful, he can lose this one. Because Vladimir is a pretty durable guy and he's willing to trade. That's what he wants. And I know he has 5 losses on his record. I only know he doesn't have a lot of wins. He only has 14 wins, but don't look at the record. The guy is better than advertised, and his record may state. I think Troy Isley, he's gonna have to box. But he's going to have the moments where he's going to have some dog and he's going to have to exchange with this guy. I think Troy can offer a little bit more of a dog fight than Lorenzo Truck Simpson. All right. Because in that fight there was a period when Lorenzo tried to box and try to keep the distance and work behind his jab, but ended up pretty much being a dogfight, and that made the fight very, very close and competitive. I think if that fight turns out to be that same type of fight with Troy Isley, I would pick Troy to do a little better in a dogfight than Lorenzo did, But I still think this is very close, and even though I'm leaning towards Troy to win, it's gonna be tough. It's not gonna be easy. This is a real step up. And I have Troy winning, but I'm thinking by decision, and it could be very, very close. And I think it could be one of those fights, again, where people may say they thought Hernandez won the fight. Now, if Troy can actually hurt him and stop him, that would be very, very impressive. But he has to be ready for a dogfight. But I think it would be best if he can mix it up and find opportunities to fight and use his range and distance and try to outbox Hernandez on the outside a little bit while picking the spots and using opportunities to throw the combinations and all that and mixing it up. So it's going to be a tough one, but this is the proper fight that you take on the way up to see what you really got. And this might be one of those ones that Troy can look phenomenal, all right? Or Troy can look And some people might walk away from this fight saying, "Oh, he's not that good," But I'm telling you guys, he's fighting a good opponent, and you should definitely look out for this fight because it's gonna be a war. All right, this is one of the fights that I think you guys should watch on this undercard. So be on the lookout for that. All right. Moving on. Let's talk about Brian Norman Jr. against Quentin Randall. This is even an even harder fight to call, in my opinion. A very, very tough fight. Brian Norman Jr. is a slight favorite to win. He's the more known fighter because of his sparring stories and, specifically with Terrence Crawford, Tank Davis. Younger fighter, younger prospect, but he's known because of the sparring stories. Now, as far as his pro fights, this is definitely an upgrade for him. Haven't fought the best kind of fighters. But this is his step up against a Quentin Randall who was older and started boxing much later, But he's experienced as an amateur, and he's also been in there and sparred with some of the best fighters out there. He's been in there with the best of them. Now, he don't have the stories that Brian Norman have, but as a pro, I think he's been slightly fighting some better fighters. But it doesn't really matter because I think Brian Norman would beat anybody that Quentin Randall has faced and beat. And I think Quentin would probably beat anyone that Brian Norman has fought. So I think this is a very even fight. Even though Brian Norman is a slight favorite, I think it's an even fight. And they both have two different styles. Dimensions are different. I mean, they're both orthodox fighters. I think Brian is maybe a little bit quicker, maybe a little bit more athletic, more explosive, even maybe be a little bit more powerful. But, I mean, I'm basing off the knockout records and a ratio of his knockouts. He can punch. But again, he hasn't fought the best guys, and he hasn't fought past 8 rounds. His last 2 fights went to a decision, As far as Quentin, though, Quentin taller, rangier, really knows how to control distance well. And may not be a KO artist. Again, he's fought past He's only fought past. No, he hasn't fought past 8 rounds neither. No, he's fought. He's gone to 10 rounds. I didn't know that he went to 10 rounds once. All right, but different kind of fighter. More defensive in my opinion. Better timing. Good jab. Knows how to control distance very well. And that is what makes it a really good fight because you got the explosiveness and the dog and Brian Norman Jr. And then you have the more technically sound, patient fighter and Quentin Randall. You know what I mean? It's close fight to call because they're both their step-up fights. And, the styles, it really depends on, I can see Brian Norman catching Quentin Randall with a overhand right over his jab and possibly hurting him, you know what I mean? Or making it a dogfight where Quentin, he might be a little bit too much for Quentin. Or I could see Quentin just beating him with timing, you know what I mean? Brian Norman is very explosive, but he's pretty reckless, and especially in the fights that I've seen him in, Brian Norman normally comes out to be very, very explosive. But as the fight goes on, it's kind of like Demetrius Andrade, where if Brian Norman doesn't really get you out of there in the earlier rounds, because he comes out blazing normally, and if he doesn't get you out of there, he kind of coasts for the rest of the fight. You know what I mean? So if you look at his resume, you'll see a lot of 1-round knockouts and stuff like that because he comes out blitzing you. But once that doesn't work out, he kind of coasts and slows down dramatically for the rest of the fight. And that's where I think Quentin would it would favor him in that kind of fight because he's a more patient fighter. He's not a pressure fighter at all. He's the kind of guy that likes to set traps and work behind his jab and counter. And it's just that Quentin has a good one too, for sure. Sometimes he'll step back, throw, a nice uppercut, time you with the uppercut, especially if you're lunging and leaning forward. He can handle himself on the inside, definitely. Knows how to frame good and create some space in order to, land some good body shots and stuff. He's definitely the more technical between the two. But again, pressure busts price. And I think if Brian Norman comes out and if he can consistently, if he can get in range and throw and land some of those combinations and be somewhat of a bully in there, he can definitely have a good chance of winning this one. But I think it's 50-50. Honestly, this is one of the two fights that I put money on tonight. And I am leaning towards Quentin Randall and pulling off the upset. I think Brian Norman, defense is a little off. Yes, he's explosive. Yes, he can punch. But I think if Quentin Randall, I'm expecting Quentin Randall to slow the pace down and outbox him a little bit. I don't know if he can stop Brian or anything like that. I don't know about all that. But I'm leaning towards Quentin pulling off an upset in a very, very close competitive fight. And I have my money on him. I have my money on him pulling it out. All right. There's not much on Quentin online. A lot of it is based on his story and, interviews and stuff like that. It's not much footage of him. So it's definitely risky, because there's a fight where he had a draw, right? And I couldn't find that online. And I would like to see exactly what caused the draw. But in his more recent fights, there is some footage up there. And he's been very active. I mean, they've both been pretty active. And I'm going to go with the guy that's more technically sound to me. I think even though Brian Norman has a lot of speed, I'm going to go with Quentin Randall's timing over Brian Norman's speed and explosiveness. Just because I see flaws in Brian Norman Jr. I think he needs a little bit more time, you know what I mean, to develop some of his skills. And being that he's much shorter and, I don't think he's the best at closing distance. I think he's a little bit too reckless. And I think the timing of Randall will edge him out in this fight. Could be wrong. It is risky. Brian, again, definitely has more than a puncher's chance because he can crack. Now, I'm going to go with Quentin Randall. And I think he might edge it out. All right, but definitely one of the better fights on the card, and I think it might end up being a chess match, but I'm expecting if Quentin Randall is to slow down the pace, I think Brian is going to try to turn it into a dog fight. And it can leave him, in situations where he's going to get countered. You know what I mean? So I have Quentin Randall winning this one. All right. All right. So let's get to the co-main event and the main event. Emmanuel Navarrete is going to be facing off against Robson Conceicao. And this is going to be a fight for the super featherweight title, the WBO. Robson Conceicao has been in there with these guys around, he's been in there with Oscar Valdez. He's been in there with Shakur Stevenson. You know what I mean? He's a good boxer. He's a Brazilian gold medalist, and he can box really, really well. All right. I like watching him. I think he's a good fighter. I think he's a guy that's willing to trade with you. He's willing to bang with you. But he can box really good. You know what I mean? I think the problem with Robson is that he's going to want to trade with Emmanuel Navarrete at times. He's gonna get trapped into doing it. I just he's gonna do it. And even though he has good defense, he has a little slickness to him. He's gonna get trapped in fighting Emmanuel Navarrete's fight. I think all of these guys kind of do. And I think it's just too hard to prepare for Navarrete and his awkwardness. I think there's certain fighters here, like Luis Alberto Lopez is another fighter, and he's at 126. These guys throw punches from really awkward angles, and I think you might watch him and watch like Emmanuel Navarrete, right? And you'll say like there are opportunities for their opponents to counter them and catch them. Yeah, Navarrete is not the best with defense, but he makes up for it with his power and his awkward angles. You know what I mean? It's hard to prepare for fighters that fight that way. The combinations are coming from different areas where you're not, it's not really taught. And I think that's the biggest issue that the opponents of Navarrete have. There are opportunities like Oscar Valdez. There were plenty of opportunities leading up to the fight when we're talking about the matchup itself. And I remember doing a breakdown for that fight. And we knew prior to the Valdez fight, Navarrete was always kind of a slow starter. He struggled in certain fights in the earlier rounds. You know what I mean? You look at the Liam Wilson fight. That was one fight before that. Even the Eduardo Baez fight. There are fights where he's kind of struggling early. He's fought some really good fights. Joet Gonzalez, Christopher Diaz, Ruben Villa. Excuse me. All the way down to, Isaac Dobe. He struggled in some fights, and there were periods where people were able to capitalize off his defensive flaws and stuff like that. But the guy is extremely durable. He's extremely durable, and he's extremely awkward. He can switch, and he can just, man, it's the power, it's the explosiveness, it's the combinations. And he's just come off to be too much. And the Oscar Valdez fight, where we believed to be a slow starter, he started out very quickly in the first round. And by the end of that fight, yes, he took some good shots in that fight. It was certain periods in that fight where it was a war. Both of them was going back and forth at each other. It didn't even matter. This guy at the end of the fight looked like he was sparring. He didn't have any damage on his face or anything. And Oscar Valdez is a pretty solid puncher. You know what I mean? I think what happens here is, Robson is going to come out. He's going to try to box and fight a more intelligent fight and be a little bit defensive and, work behind a counter and stuff. But it's going to be, the pressure is going to be too much. And I think he's going to fall into a trap of fighting, going to war and trading with Navarrete. And he's going to end up getting trapped into a dogfight. And I think Emmanuel Navarrete is going to be the first to stop him. Valdez couldn't do it. Shakur couldn't do it. I think that Navarrete is going to be able to do it. I think Conceicao's best chances of winning the fight is you got to go to this guy's body. And I know it's very easy to say that. It's easier said than done. But that's the only way to do it. This head hunting is not going to be enough. You got to have to work on going to his body. I think that's where to go. I think that's where the money shot is, the body. And if Robson Conceicao can land something big to the body, or possibly just continuously throw this work the body, find those opportunities while you're on the outside to throw combinations to the body, make this guy feel it, make this guy not willing to really engage you like that, and then box him from the outside, But if he just goes into a straight war with Emmanuel Navarrete, without going to the body much, I think he loses, and I think he's gonna get stopped. And my money is on Navarrete being the first guy to stop him. I think he's gonna do it. Those are the only two fights of money. That's the only two fights I put money up. I got Quentin Randall. I put some on him, and I got a little bit on Navarrete to win by stoppage. Okay. Anyway, let's move on to the next fight and the main event. Shakur Stevenson. Excuse me. Let me get some water real quick. All right, main event: Shakur Stevenson, Edwin De Los Santos. Now, great fight. Probably the best matchup for Shakur Stevenson. My favorite matchup of his to date. He stepped up over the years, going through the rankings and the divisions, and I think his first test was Christopher Diaz. I think the Joe Gonzalez fight was a solid fight. Jamel Herring was a good test for him. Then he had Oscar Valdez on paper was the best fight for him. Robson Conceicao, pretty solid opponent. Just talking about him. Yoshino, good, good, strong, come forward fighter. But I just think this fight here, I think Edwin is by far the most dangerous opponent for Shakur Stevenson to date. Maybe not on paper, but I think that this guy, Santos, he's so athletic. He's so powerful. He's so fast. He's extremely explosive. And he's pretty good from a technical standpoint. He's pretty good. Okay. I think this guy has more. He brings more to the table than all of the rest of these guys that Shakur has fought. And I would actually lean towards Edwin to beat the rest of these fighters, regardless of what they accomplished and if they were champions, and that's cool. But I would pick Edwin to beat all of those guys too. Okay. Edwin's in southpaw, and so is Shakur. They're both southpaws. I think Shakur's most recent fight against a southpaw was against Jamel Herring. And I think Edwin would beat Jamel Herring. I think Edwin would probably stop Jamel Herring if they were to fight. You know what I mean? But the same thing with Edwin, and I think people have now noticed, or in giving Santos a lot of credit going into this fight. I think people are aware of him now. But the problem with that, and I was saying this when the fight first got announced, I told you guys that I like the fight with Santos more than the Frank Martin fight. You know what I mean? I still believe that guys like Devin Haney, Tank Davis are better opponents, more dangerous opponents, and more difficult fights for Shakur than Edwin. But I do think Edwin is more dangerous for Shakur than Frank Martin. Because unlike Frank and a lot of the opponents that Shakur has faced up to this point, Edwin is gonna bring the fight straight to him. And I don't mean just pressure. I don't mean by that. What makes Edwin dangerous is that he's willing to trade and take a hit to give one. In the fight against Ryo, all right, he was willing to trade and take a big shot in order to give one. And I'm talking about Jose Valenzuela. And that's a fight you got to go to because those are two southpaw fighting. All right. So when you watch the fight, you will notice that it was a war. In those 3 rounds of fighting, it was a war. It was a very entertaining fight, going back and forth, knockdowns, and all of that. They both traded knockdowns and stuff. It was a good clash. The problem is when it comes to Edwin and him fighting Shakur. When you look at Shakur and look at who he's faced, like when you look at him versus Jamel Herring, Jamel is just not as athletic as Edwin, not as big of a puncher as Edwin, and he's not as much of a dog as Edwin. As Jamel Herring was losing his fight to Shakur, Jamel tried to make it more of a dog fight because he was getting outboxed in the first few rounds. So Jamel tried to force a dog fight with Shakur, and he lost there too because he just doesn't pack the punch. He's just not as physical, and it's just Edwin is just better at that kind of fight. You know what I mean? But at the same time, when you look at Jose Valenzuela, it's like, man, this guy is getting hit with every punch that Edwin is throwing at him. And you can't really compare neither of these southpaws, and I'm talking about Jamel Herring and I'm talking about Jose Valenzuela. You can't compare them to Shakur or Edwin because I think they both bring so much more to the table. So doing film study is like kind of pointless because both fighters are dangerous in their own ways. And Valenzuela, yes, it was a great entertaining fight, but Valenzuela is just defensively flawed. You know what I mean? He doesn't have any advantages over Shakur. I mean, you can make an argument that may be power, but you can't really prove that. Because who did Jose Valenzuela really fight? You know what I mean? Shakur is a guy that we know he's a defensive fighter. All right? But I don't think he gets enough credit for his offense. And I think it's because he don't have like that one punch knockout power. But I also think that his power is underrated. And what I mean by that is I think that his power hurts. I think his punches hurt enough where people respect it to a point where they don't just try to walk through it. Edwin, I made a point about Edwin liking to trade. Like he's more willing to trade, you know? He likes to turn into a dogfight. He can do both. He can sit there and outbox you. Like when he fought Joseph Adorno, he sat there and outboxed Adorno. You know what I mean? But there were periods where he would let his hands go and trade and throw combinations. But he would know how to get out of the way. He has great reflexes. So, you know, he would know how to slip and move out of the way what's getting thrown back at him. But defensively, he's not nearly as good as Shakur. And when I'm watching the Jose Valenzuela fight, he's getting off not only by throwing and landing everything that he's throwing, like he was hurting Jose with jabs. But he didn't fight a fighter in that fight that was really countering him. You know what I mean? He was fighting a guy that was easy to hit and wasn't countering much. And as I watch Edwin, he's just having his way in his fights because I'm thinking, what would Shakur do in this sequence here? You know, whereas I'm expecting Shakur would counter, slip and roll some of these punches and land some short left hands. And I don't see the opponent of Edwin doing that. You know what I mean? I think Edwin is going to have a problem with Shakur's left hand. I think specifically the overhand left and a left cross. I think those are going to be the two money shots of Shakur Stevenson. All right. Because Edwin, he does a couple of things that I feel may be an issue for him. I noticed that when he leans, he's a southpaw. So when he leans to his left, right, when he leans low to his left, he kind of stays there for a little too long. And I noticed that Jose was able to land some left crosses, all right, straight down on the side of his head a few times. Sometimes he will land two of them back to back. And that's going to be a problem for him against Shakur. And Shakur is not only going to land that left cross, but he's going to follow it up with a right hook, which is his power hand. All right. Shakur is a southpaw, but the power is in his lead hand. Okay. I think that's going to be a problem for Edwin. Also, when Edwin likes to pivot and move to his right, I believe, and like let's say he's throwing that check right hook, sometimes he doesn't lean back enough. Like he kind of keeps his head in place. And I think when he's throwing a check right hook, I think his head is still too far up. And not all the time though. It's not consistent because I watched it and I noticed that like when he was fighting Adorno, and I know he's an orthodox fighter, but I noticed that at times that whenever he would turn to his right, he wouldn't lean back. If you watch Shakur do it, you would notice that Shakur is always leaning back and he's probably having his right hand up at the same time. There's like key little like things like that I feel like Shakur would be getting the better of him as far as accuracy. You know what I mean? What I am a little bit concerned when it comes to Shakur is that when Edwin at some point, being that he is so fast and he's willing to trade, he's willing to hit you and get hit. He's willing to leave himself open to get countered in order to land his punch. And I think part of the reason why he beat Rayo is because he just took the punches better. A lot of the punches that were landing from both of those guys in that fight, they both traded. They both trade punches. It's that Jose couldn't take the power as good as Edwin did. Edwin just was more durable. But he kept getting hit. You know what I mean? Yes, he took a knee and he went down at one point, but he was never badly hurt. He got rocked a couple of times, but he was never hurt. Whereas Rayo was getting hurt by every clean power shot, even the jabs at some point. And it made it where Edwin can continue to take that risk of getting clipped because he just took the punches better. So a fighter like that is dangerous because Shakur, who has proven to be a dog, he's proven to be a dog against fighters that wasn't on that level of being a dog. Jamel Herring just couldn't compete with him in a dog fight. He just couldn't. And none of the rest of these fighters couldn't either. Whereas Edwin would be better at that kind of fight. And being that he's so fast and powerful, and he's a good counterpuncher himself, his best chances of winning this fight is not strictly based on accuracy and precision and defense, but more about landing the right shot during those exchanges. Shakur is good defensively, but he still gets hit. He still gets hit. It's not like he doesn't get hit. And being that he's now fighting a puncher, all right, it could be an issue for Shakur. This may be the first fight where Shakur looks a little bit vulnerable. There's other fighters like Haney, for example, or Tank, for example, where they had a fight where they looked a bit vulnerable. Where people will say they will rate them so high and then they'll have a fight where they don't look so good. This may be the first fight where Shakur either struggles a little bit more than what we're usually seeing him as, or he might get clipped with a big shot. Might be. But also, it might be a fight where Shakur knows exactly where and that's the thing. Shakur, regardless of how he acts or what he says outside of the ring, inside of the ring, he's one of the most disciplined fighters out there. And I think that we'll see tonight that he's going to be as disciplined as possible. In the earlier round specifically, stay away from throwing too many combinations. Okay? I think if Shakur is getting the better at him and Edwin is beginning to slow down for some of the damage, that's when you start to open up a little bit more with combinations. But early on, keep the combinations short. Don't throw more than 2 punches at a time because this guy wants to engage that way. And as far as Edwin, that's the kind of fight you want to bring. That's the kind of energy you want to bring. I think just simply trying to outbox and outwit Shakur is not going to work for him. I think he might start out that way. And I think at some point, because he's getting outboxed and Shakur is landing more consistently, I think Edwin is going to be more aggressive, maybe after a couple rounds. And it would leave himself more open to get countered, but it would give him the opportunity to land something big during the exchange that they have. All right, so I personally have Shakur winning this fight. I didn't place a bet. I know most people are going to place something on Edwin because of the chances of him having like a puncher's chance or just him being a tough opponent. They might just expect an upset. But if you're going to bet, I just didn't think it was worth betting on Shakur. I think Shakur is going to win the fight. I just don't know how. I know he stopped Yoshino recently. I can't really, I think Shakur can at least drop Santos at some point in the fight. I think he will drop Santos, but I don't know as far as stopping him. I'm not sure about that. All right, but I like Shakur winning the fight. I think it's a good test. I think it's a great opponent. Maybe not on paper, but I love the fight. It should be a good fight. And I think as far as a matchup, it's probably going to be the most entertaining Shakur Stevenson fight that we've seen so far. It might be overrated Edwin a little bit, but we'll see. But I like Edwin as far as a matchup. I think he's one of the better matchups for Shakur right now at 135. All right. Anyway, all right, that's my breakdown. I will be here live later on this afternoon or early this evening. So please subscribe to the channel. You'll get notified when I log in. So be on the lookout for me later. And I'll see you guys later on this afternoon. Peace. Have a good one.